I read those instructions. I read that small set of instructions. I read that sentence of instructions. But the visual learner in me went straight to the illustration. And that's where I got messed up. Any pattern instructions that you have, you can work your way through them. It doesn't matter who wrote them. None of that matters. Hey, it's Terry, Virginia's daughter, and I am back today with Vogue 2007. Yes. Y'all, this pattern is everything.
Everything.
In my opinion, it's the only special occasion pattern that you'll ever need. Not even that misleading cuff illustration that I'm going to talk about later could cause me to dislike it. It's a pattern that I would make again. It's definitely a keep for me, and I highly recommend that you get this pattern. Okay, period. Now, there are quite a few tips in this video, yeah? 10. But what I want you to keep in mind is don't look at them separately. Don't look at it as like 10 tips, but think of the tips all being a system that work together to produce a particular outcome for you. To help you get through sewing instructions to get to the final outcome is where we all want to be, right? So in this case, it's a top and a skirt. Now, the beauty about these tips is that any and all of these tips can be applied to any sewing instructions. Any. You find some that it didn't work for, let me know. You can use these tips to guide your way through to come out on the other side of frustration, feeling overwhelmed, and just deflated when it comes to sewing. Sometimes you're like, what am I, chopped liver? Like, I've been sewing for a lot of years, like I can't figure this out. And in my opinion, those types of emotions take the joy right out of sewing. The structure of this video is going to be, first I'm going to give you the tips. For those of you who are interested in just the tips, I'm going to give you those right away. All 10 tips consecutively. Second, I'm going to apply the tips that apply to this pattern. What you'll learn, and what you may know already, is that all tips don't apply to every pattern. But what you do is you build like you have this toolkit or library of tips that you can go to anytime you have a problem. And one or all of them may work. All right? Let's get it. Quick backstory. The early part of September, I found out that my son was going to be a keynote speaker at an event in October. Right away, I purchased this pattern and I purchased this fabric. And looking back, I should have just made it anyway. Now I've learned my lesson. So going forward, if this ever happened again, I would just, whenever I bought the stuff, I would just make it to be ready. But I didn't realize I was going to be attending the event until Tuesday, October 1st, 4 days before the event took place. So I got started. Right away. I trimmed the pattern October 1st. At that time, I was dealing with a time constraint. I had taken on a commitment that was taking up much of my time. So I had a limited amount of time that I could devote to it. But y'all, I was determined. I was like, it's a top and a skirt. Like, I can make it. Well, I didn't make it. I got pretty darn close, but pretty darn close don't count. Okay, all wasn't lost. I purchased an outfit, went to the gala, had a wonderful time, and when I tell you my son nailed it, he nailed it. Included in the pattern are 2 tops and a skirt that's 2 lengths. View B, the top that I didn't make, is cut on the crosswise grain, has long sleeves with a continuous lap opening and button cuffs. View A, the top that I did make, has patch pockets, below elbow sleeves with a split cuff, and a back yoke. There's 41 steps in the construction of this top. All was good.
All was gravy. All was great.
Until I got to step 36, which reads as follows. Stitch each cuff section together at ends, leaving opening at large dots. I read those instructions. I read that small set of instructions. I read that sentence of instructions. But the visual learner in me went straight to the illustration. And that's where I got messed up. Tip 1. Read and reread the instructions as much as you have to, as slow as you have to, and even out loud if you have to. For some of us, this step is a matter of patience. You do not want to spend time in the sewing instructions. Sewing takes patience anyway, but some areas of sewing takes more patience than others. And the last thing me, and I'm sure some of you want to do, is spend hours and days, sometimes even, let's be honest, in the pattern instructions. The more you read, something may become more clearer. It's like when you watch a movie. When you watch it the second time or the third time, you're like, I didn't see that the first time. Just keep reading. It doesn't matter how many times you have to read it. Read it until something clicks, until something becomes clear. It's like, oh, you get that aha moment. Step 2. Break the instructions down into smaller chunks or sentences. I think this is a mindset. At the end of each one of my videos, there's a Mark Twain quote that says, "The secret to getting ahead is getting started. The secret to getting started is to break your complex, overwhelming tasks into small, manageable tasks and starting on the first one." Take a look at each part separately, understand each part, and then put it together to move on to the next part. Now, of course, this particular sentence, it's one sentence, so you can still break it down. You can break anything down. Tip 3. Paraphrase. Take whatever they say. Try to reword the instructions in your own words. Put them in the way that you understand. It may not be perfect, but you might do it in such a way that you get the gist based on the way you process, and you understand reading. Your rephrasing it could clarify the core meaning of what is happening in the instructions. Tip 4. Identify key terms and important words. I can remember when I was a math teacher, I would say, when students had word problems, they hated word problems. And I'm like, they're not as bad as you think. All you have to do is highlight the key information, important terms and important information to get you started on your way to a solution. You want to focus on the words and key terms that's going to lead to the meaning, right? Every single word in the sentence is not a core meaning of what the sentence is talking about. You want to focus on the key terms and the important words. Tip 5. Research unfamiliar terms. To be honest with you, these tips could apply to reading, period. I just happen to be talking about sewing patterns because, I'm trying to help my people who sew. Don't just read over something and not know what it means. So look it up. And if you find that you have to look up a word, write it down, document it. Keep a little list or, journal of words that you've had to look up. So then it becomes easy to refer to that. You don't have to look it up every single time. And eventually you look at it enough, you're going to come to know the meaning of the word. So it's not going to be unfamiliar anymore. And this will surely give you a better understanding of what is written. Tip number 5. Ask yourself questions. Ask yourself questions. If it doesn't make sense, ask yourself a question. Because if you answer the question, then, chances are it's going to move you forward in the instructions. And I know right now that might not make sense, but stay tuned because I'm going to apply that to this pattern. I did that. I asked myself a few questions. Okay. Tip 7. Look for context. I got stuck on step 36, but there's a step 35 and there's a step 37. There's step 41. It went to 41. So try to look at the steps before the confusing step. Try to look at the step after the confusing step. Try to look at the illustrations. It all goes together.
They're supposed to.
They are supposed to. And even if they don't, I have to say, even if they don't, you can work your way through them with these tips. My point exactly. There is something in the body of those instructions that will give you clues about where you messed up. You just have to find them. Tip 8. Interpret the illustrations using information in the pattern instructions. Pattern writers are the bomb, if you ask me. And I don't fault anybody for mistakes in patterns because I'm sure it's a lot of work that goes into it. However, they do a really, really, really good job of putting the information that you're going to need to make this pattern in the actual pattern, on the actual instructions. There's an area that has terms. In some cases, you may not have to look up a word. There's an area for cutting layouts. They show you what the right side of the fabric looks like, what the wrong side of the fabric looks like, interfacing, so on and so forth. So use that information that you've been given to try to figure out illustrations. Tip 9. Use external resources. I've made a top like this before back in the day, but it was a different pattern. Similar, to be honest. It's like this style with a long skirt. I'm like, I know I didn't have any problems with that top. I wasn't sure why I was having trouble here, so I Googled it. I Googled Vogue 2007. Nothing about the cuff came up. At the time, no one had even made it yet. So what I didn't do was try sewing forums, pattern review. I didn't try any of that. When you use external resources, use as many as you can. If you have any, just drop it in the comments. People read the comments, yeah? We could start our own list of, external resources that can help us with our sewing. Tip 10. The final tip for this time, because remember, this is by no means an exhaustive list. If you want some more of my tips, let me know in the comments. The last tip is to take a break, walk away. That's also a mindset. This can apply to many things in our lives. Sometimes you just got to be like, you know what? I'm gonna walk away. I'll be right back. Especially if you're feeling like you don't know anything, you know, I should know how to do this. And, you know, all those feelings. When it gets to that point, it's time to get up and walk away. And I'm sure any of us who have done it, you know, it's a perfect opportunity to clear your mind, clear your head. And then when you get back to it, you're like, oh, okay, now I see what I gotta do. Thank you. Now let's take these tips that I've shared with you and apply them to Vogue 2007.
I read it. I reread it. Okay, I did that.
Each cuff section has two ends. Sew the two ends together, leaving an opening. In other words, don't sew above the large dot. Stop at the large dot. Leave the part above the large dot open. You know what I mean? Just in different words. If I had to pick an important word in this sentence, it would be each. It led me to the question, how many cuff sections are there? I have to do this to each cuff section, but how many are there? I asked myself the question. The answer, 4. There's 4 cuff sections. 2 that are interfaced, 2 that are not. So now I'm going to stitch each cuff section together at ends. Another question I asked myself was, and I ask myself this often when I get stuck, is what's the final outcome supposed to look like? When it's finished and on the garment, how does it look? And then I go backwards to see if I can figure it out. When I looked at the illustration, I'm like, what? I realized that this was 2. Step 36 says, which would lead you to believe this is a single cuff section. Right? Because it says stitch each cuff section. But why would you have to stitch a cuff section at the ends of a single piece? If you see stitching like this, you are stitching 2 things together, right? That's how I see it. And let me tell you how I know it's true. This is the interface piece here, but there's a small margin that you see that shows the right side of the fabric. You know, interfacing is not attached to the right side of the fabric. It's attached to the wrong side to give it structure. If you look at the sewing information, step 1, where you actually do the interfacing. I know I'm rummaging through these pages, but this is what we do. See how 9 shows you the back, which is the interfacing, but it shows you the wrong side of the fabric. So you know this is one section. The illustration in step 36 doesn't look like that. This is obviously 2 pieces, 2 sections sewn together. It's not each section like it mentions in the instructions. I don't fault anybody for this. People are only human. We all make mistakes. But I am the one that's dealing with this. So I've got to work my way through this. So that's what these tips are all about. And now step 37 makes all the sense in the world. So now you're working on combining the 2 sections to make a single piece to attach to each sleeve. If you look at the illustration for step 37, you can clearly see that below the dot that's shown, it's already been stitched. You can see seam allowances that have been stitched. And then it shows you the stitching where it says stitch upper edge, breaking stitching at large dot. And then it shows you the actual stitching that you're going to do. And I love the way they show you this because they show you the wrong side of the outside of the cuff and the inside of the interfacing. Each cuff has 2 sections, an interfaced and an uninterfaced. So this is the uninterfaced part that they're showing you on the outside. And then on the inside is the interfaced side, and you're stitching at the top, which also lets you know that you have to put one cuff inside of the other. The right side of the cuffs have to be together so that when you turn it, it's going to look like step 38. Some things you're going to know from experience. Your experience is a big tip also. Any pattern instructions that you have, you can work your way through them. It doesn't matter who wrote them, how they wrote them, none of that matters. Once we develop a system for working through pattern instructions, it doesn't matter. This brings me to a question. Have you ever had pattern instructions that you couldn't figure out? Let me know in the comments. Give me the pattern number. I would be interested in knowing, seriously, for my own reasons. Speaking of other patterns, do you all remember McCall's 8146? That was a top, cute top, Myrtle McCall's. The instructions were a little tricky because on the one side of the top, you attached the tie to the front. On the second side of the top, you attached it to the side edge. So one side was being attached directly to the front, but the second tie was attached to the side edge. What some people did is attach both ties here. Well, once both ties were attached to the front, it didn't work. like, you know what I mean? It wasn't the way the pattern was made. And recently, that pleat that I did in that new look pattern, I think it was the illustrations that got me through that step, helped me through that. The last one I'll talk about, I made this Ponte knit trench dress, I call it. Listen, this thing was a doozy. Okay, this one almost took me out. Okay, but I can't go out like that. The illustrations are what made me realize how to fix it. When you go through a situation where you have confusing instructions or you struggle a little bit with a project, it's that more appreciative when you conquer it, because then you can wear it, Hey,
I did it.
listen, if I can help somebody, I'm gonna try to do it. Interestingly enough, Vogue considers this pattern a Mrs. two-piece dress. So you have the tops and then you have the skirt. Now the skirt is in two lengths. One is like a maxi skirt like the one I made. And then one is a little shorter. It's mid-calf. Both skirts are cut on the crosswise grain. Everything is cut on the crosswise grain except top A. The skirts has waist pleats, an invisible zipper. Of course, it has a waistband, 2 hook and bar closures, and horsehair braid that you would use for the hem. I didn't use horsehair braid. I do have some in my stash. Virginia has some. I inherited from her. But, I wasn't sure what this fabric was. Okay, I was like, is it stretch? But it's not. It's like a burnout oil. It does have a little bit of stretch. See, now it's stretching. For some reason, I thought this fabric was more stretchy than it was. And I'm like, I don't know how I've never used horse braid hair. I don't know how it's going to react. So I just used a stiff interfacing around the edge of the hem, which I think works fine. It does have a large hem in it though. It has a big hem. I'm 5'2". I did some adjusting for the hem so that it wouldn't be so long, and ended up having to cut like 3 inches off anyway. If you're on the shorter side, you might want to consider that, adjusting your pattern, because you don't want to waste that fabric. The skirt, I made a size 14. The top, I made a size 12. Now, I'm going to tell you, this top is a little bit more snug than it was in October or even last month. So I didn't get to wear the outfit to that event, right? But I did get to wear it to a different event. When I make this again, I will make the top in a 14 and the skirt in a 12. The buttons for the top, I didn't have enough of one type of button, so I used different buttons for the top. Both of the fabrics were purchased at Joann Fabrics. They're both special occasion fabrics. I love the way this outfit turned out. Do you have this pattern? Would you get it? I know it's not everybody's style, but if it's your style, you got to get it. The pattern comes in sizes 8 through 26. The difficulty level is average. That is it. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks to all of you who just be sticking around for me, okay? You know, it's been like, I don't know, 4 months since my last video. And some of y'all, that don't even matter. You know what I mean? I appreciate that. Y'all my people. Oh, wait a minute. Happy New Year. I hope all is well with you, your families. Your new year is off to a great start. Create something fabulous every time you create something. And until next time, take care.